Amina lay burning with fever on a narrow hospital bed in a small Lagos clinic, her body too weak to sit upright, her future hanging on a single phone call. When she begged for mercy, just one chance to reschedule the interview that could change her daughter's life, the voice on the other end was cold and final. No rescheduling, no exceptions. The line went dead. Tears slid silently down her temples as she stared at the cracked ceiling, whispering a prayer not for herself, but for her child. In the corner of the room, 5-year-old Zuri watched without a sound. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Something deeper settled in her small chest, a quiet decision forming where fear should have been. That morning, while the city rushed past without noticing, a child would stand up to a system that had already decided her mother was invisible. If you're watching from Africa or the diaspora, comment your country and local time below. And don't forget to subscribe. This story is just beginning. Amina's story did not begin in that small clinic in Lagos, nor did it begin with sickness or desperation. Long before her body grew weak from exhaustion and untreated fevers, she had been known for something else entirely: her brilliance. She was once the girl teachers spoke about with pride. The one who stayed after class to ask questions. The one who borrowed books she could barely afford time to read because she was already helping her mother sell vegetables in the evenings. Amina had earned her place at university on merit alone, winning a competitive scholarship that carried the weight of her family's hopes. For the first time, survival was not the only word shaping her future. Purpose had joined it. At university, Amina thrived. She studied marketing with intensity and joy, discovering how ideas could move people, how strategy could change outcomes. She led study groups, mentored classmates, and was elected president of the Student Business Association. Lectures described her as focused, articulate, and uncommonly disciplined. She dreamed of working in a place where her mind mattered, where she could build something lasting, not just for herself, but for the community that had poured into her. Then life interrupted her plans without warning. Pregnancy came quietly, followed by panic, fear, and impossible choices. The father disappeared before the first trimester ended, leaving behind silence and unanswered calls. The scholarship board offered sympathy, but sympathy did not pay rent or buy food. Amina tried to continue her studies, but the weight of reality pressed harder each day. Morning sickness turned into constant fatigue. Lecture halls became battlegrounds between ambition and survival. When her daughter Zuri was born, everything else fell away. Amina did not resent her child, not once, but the cost of love was heavy. University became a memory she folded away like an old certificate too painful to look at for long. The world did not pause to acknowledge her sacrifice. Bills arrived on time. Hunger did not wait, and so Amina stepped into the work available to women like her, work that asked for her body, not her mind. She cleaned houses for families who never learned her name. She sold cooked food under the sun, balancing heavy trays on her head while Zuri slept on her back as a baby. She worked as a waitress, smiling through insults and unpaid overtime. At night, she took janitorial shifts in office buildings she once dreamed of entering as a professional. Every job bled into the next, forming a long, exhausting chain of effort that rarely led anywhere new. Still, she endured. What little she earned never stayed with her for long. Shoes wore out, but she delayed replacing them. Clothes faded, but she mended them carefully. When money was short, and it often was, Amina always found a way to protect one thing: her daughter's dignity. Zuri went to school clean and fed. Her notebooks were neat. Her uniform, though second-hand, was always pressed. At night, after Zuri fell asleep, Amina would sometimes sit on the edge of the mattress and stare into the darkness. In those moments, the thoughts she buried during the day surfaced. She remembered debates in lecture halls, group presentations, the feeling of being seen for her ideas instead of her endurance. She did not cry loudly. She cried the way tired women do, silently, efficiently, wiping tears before they could become distractions. Zuri noticed more than Amina realized. Children are quiet witnesses. They may not understand systems or structures, but they understand patterns. Zuri saw how her mother returned home limping some nights, how her hands shook as she counted coins on the table. She heard the sighs that followed unpaid bills and the gentle lies, "I'm just tired, my love." She learned early that her mother's smiles were often borrowed from a strength that was running out. The interview at Mabaso Group Holdings had not come easily. Amina had applied to dozens of places over the years, often without replies. Her resume confused recruiters. Too educated for entry-level roles, too inexperienced for professional ones. Some assumed she lacked commitment. Others quietly dismissed her when they noticed the employment gap and the years spent in informal work. No one asked why. When the interview invitation finally arrived, Amina reread the email 3 times, afraid it might vanish if she blinked. It was not a senior position. The salary was modest. But it was a door back into the world she had been forced to leave, a place where her mind could work again. She prepared for days. She updated her resume, carefully printing it at a cyber cafe and sliding it into a clear folder she guarded like glass. She practiced interview answers aloud while cooking, while washing clothes, while Zuri colored beside her. At night, she lay awake imagining the office, the questions, the possibility of finally being seen. Then her body gave in. Years of overwork and neglect caught up to her at once. The fever came suddenly, violent and unrelenting. By the time a neighbor helped her to the clinic, Amina could barely stand. The doctor spoke of exhaustion, infection, rest, words that sounded like luxuries she could not afford. All she could think about was the interview. The call she made from that hospital bed took more courage than any exam she had ever sat for. She had rehearsed the apology, choosing words, carefully hoping for understanding. Instead, she met a wall. No empathy, no flexibility. The system spoke clearly: show up or disappear. When the call ended, Amina did not scream or curse. She simply lay back and stared upward, as though the ceiling might offer answers the world refused to give. For the first time in years, defeat pressed so heavily on her chest that breathing felt like effort. In the corner of the room, Zuri watched. She did not understand resumes or interviews. She did not know the language of corporate rejection. But she understood one thing with painful clarity: her mother was hurting and something precious had been taken away. While the machines hummed softly and the city continued without pause, a seed was planted in the mind of a child too young to know fear the way adults do. Zuri did not yet know how she would act. She only knew that waiting had never saved her mother before, and somewhere deep inside her small heart, a decision was beginning to take shape. The phone felt heavier in Amina's hand than it should have. Its cracked screen pressed against her damp palm as she waited for the line to connect, every second stretching longer than the last. The clinic smelled of disinfectant and rusted metal, the kind of place where hope came in measured doses and rarely stayed long. Her fever blurred the edges of the room, but her mind clung fiercely to one thought: this call had to work. When the voice finally answered, crisp and professional, Amina straightened as much as her weak body allowed. She swallowed hard, forcing clarity into her tone. "Good morning." She began, her voice soft but respectful. "My name is Amina Okafor. I'm scheduled for an interview today. I'm calling to apologize. I'm very unwell and currently in the hospital." I was hoping. She paused to breathe, the effort leaving her dizzy. I was hoping there might be a possibility to reschedule, just once. There was silence on the other end, not the kind filled with consideration, but the kind that suggested a cursor hovering over policy text. Then the reply came, measured and impersonal. "Ma'am, interviews are conducted strictly as scheduled. If you are unable to attend at the assigned time, your application will be withdrawn." Amina's heart dropped. "I understand policies," she said quickly, panic creeping into her voice despite her effort to contain it. but I've prepared for this for a long time. This opportunity means everything to me. I promise I will come as soon as I'm discharged." "I just need, ma'am," the voice interrupted, firmer now, edged with impatience. "We do not make exceptions. Thank you for your interest." The line went dead. No goodbye, no acknowledgement of her situation. Just the soft beep of a call ended and the quiet hum of a system that had already moved on. Amina lowered the phone slowly, as though her arm no longer belonged to her. It slipped from her fingers and landed gently on the thin mattress beside her. For a long moment she did not move, her eyes fixed on a crack in the ceiling that ran like a fault line above her bed. It reminded her of how close everything was to breaking. So this was how it ended, not with a dramatic failure or a clear mistake. Just absence. Just being unable to show up in a world that only rewarded presence. Her chest tightened as tears pooled silently at the corners of her eyes. She pressed her lips together, refusing to let the sound escape. Crying loudly felt like admitting defeat, and she was not ready for that. Instead, she whispered the words she had carried for years, the ones she always returned to when strength failed her. "Please," she murmured, barely louder than breath. "Please don't take this chance away from me." Her hand drifted instinctively toward the edge of the bed where Zuri usually sat. The thought of her daughter pierced deeper than any rejection ever could. "My child deserves better than this," Amina whispered. "She deserves more than surviving." In the corner of the room, Zuri sat very still on a small plastic chair. Her legs swung just above the floor, not quite touching it. She had been quiet the entire time, watching her mother with wide, serious eyes. She had learned long ago that when adults spoke on the phone in hushed, careful voices, something important was happening. She had watched her mother gather courage before dialing. She had seen her shoulders tense as the call progressed, and when the phone went silent, Zuri felt it before she understood it. The air in the room changed. Amina turned her face slightly, trying to hide her tears, but children are perceptive in ways adults often underestimate. Zuri noticed the way her mother's chest rose and fell faster than before. She noticed the tremble in her hands. She noticed that familiar sadness, the one that usually arrived after long days and empty promises. Zuri did not ask questions. She did not climb onto the bed or demand explanations. Instead, she folded her small hands neatly in her lap, mimicking the way her teacher taught them to sit during assembly. Inside her mind, pieces were slowly connecting. This interview had been different. For weeks, Amina had spoken about it with a cautious excitement she rarely allowed herself. She had practiced answers while stirring pots and folding clothes. She had told Zuri stories about offices with glass walls and clean floors, places where people used their heads instead of their backs. She had smiled more during those weeks, even when money was tight. Now that smile was gone. Zuri felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. It wasn't fear. It wasn't confusion. It was something heavier, something closer to resolve. As the morning dragged on, the clinic grew busier. Nurses moved in and out, adjusting drips, scribbling notes. Amina drifted in and out of shallow sleep, her fever pulling her under and releasing her again. Each time she woke, the same thought greeted her: she had missed her chance. By late afternoon, the reality settled fully into her bones. The job was gone, the door was closed, and there would be no appeal. Amina turned her head toward Zuri, forcing a weak smile. "Come here, my love," she said softly. Zuri stood and walked to the bedside. Amina reached up and brushed her daughter's curls gently, her fingers lingering as if memorizing the feel. "I'm sorry," Amina said, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was apologizing for. The world. The system herself? Zuri shook her head slowly. "It's okay, Mama," she said. Her voice was small but steady. "You're sick. You need to rest." Amina nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I just wanted things to be better for you." Zuri did not reply. She simply climbed back onto her chair and sat quietly, her gaze thoughtful. As evening settled in and the city lights flickered on outside the small clinic windows, something unseen shifted. Amina believed the worst had passed, that fate had spoken and there was nothing left to do but endure. But Zuri in her quiet corner was thinking differently. Children do not always understand limitations the way adults do. They have not yet learned which lines cannot be crossed, which rules must never be questioned. To Zuri, the problem seemed simple. Her mother could not go to the interview. That did not mean the interview could not happen. As the clinic grew quiet and Amina finally slipped into a deeper sleep, Zuri remained awake, her eyes tracing the room slowly. They landed on the brown leather bag at the foot of the bed, the one her mother guarded carefully, the one that held the papers she spoke about with such hope. Zuri's heart beat faster, not with fear but with certainty. Tomorrow morning, while the city rushed past without noticing, a little girl would make a choice that no one expected, and the door that had just been closed would soon be knocked on again by the smallest hands of all. The sky outside the clinic was still wrapped in gray when Zuri opened her eyes. Morning had not fully arrived, but the city was already stirring, engines coughing awake, distant voices calling out prices, footsteps moving with purpose. Inside the small hospital room, everything was quiet except for the steady drip of the IV beside her mother's bed. Amina lay asleep, her face pale against the thin pillow, lips dry, skin still warm with fever. For the first time since Zuri could remember, her mother looked fragile in a way that frightened her. Not tired, not stressed, fragile. Zuri slipped off the plastic chair without making a sound. She stood beside the bed for a moment, watching her mother breathe. Each rise and fall of Amina's chest felt precious, counted. Carefully, Zuri reached up on her toes and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her mother's forehead, just the way Amina did for her every night before sleep. Mama, Zuri whispered softly, though she knew her mother wouldn't hear. "You need to rest now." The words felt important, like a promise. Her eyes drifted to the brown leather bag resting near the bed, slightly worn at the corners, always kept close. Zuri had seen it many times before. It was never just a bag. It was where her mother kept documents, receipts, and the papers she spoke about with careful hope, the ones that represented a future that still believed in her. Zuri hesitated. She had been taught not to touch things that weren't hers. But she had also been taught something else, something her mother lived by every day: when someone you love is in trouble, you help in any way you can. Slowly, deliberately, Zuri reached for the zipper. The sound it made seemed loud in the quiet room, and she froze, heart-pounding, glancing at her mother's face. Amina didn't stir. Encouraged, Zuri opened the bag fully and peered inside. There it was. The clear plastic folder sat neatly on top, its edges smooth, its contents straight and clean. Zuri lifted it carefully with both hands, surprised by how heavy it felt. Not just in weight, but in meaning. This was what her mother had prepared for so long. This was the thing that had made her smile late at night and sigh in the early mornings. Zuri hugged the folder to her chest. She didn't know what a resume truly was. She didn't understand job titles or qualifications. But she knew this folder mattered. She knew it carried her mother's dreams folded tightly between pages. Her gaze moved to the small pile of clothes folded neatly in a plastic bag beside the chair. Amina always packed carefully, even when circumstances were uncertain. Zuri knelt and looked through the clothes until she found her favorite dress, the bright Ankara dress with pink, blue, and yellow flowers scattered across it. Her mother had sewn it herself for Zuri's last birthday, staying up late with needle and thread after long shifts. Zuri remembered how proud Amina had been when she finished it. How she had said, "Now you'll walk into rooms looking like you belong." Zuri pulled the dress over her head and smoothed it down, mimicking the way her mother dressed her on school mornings. She slipped her feet into her worn sandals, the ones with straps that had been repaired more than once but still held firm. She stood still for a moment, checking herself as best she could without a mirror. Neat, clean, ready. The folder looked almost comically large in her small hands, but Zuri adjusted her grip, holding it the way she had seen adults carry important things, close, protective, careful. She walked to the door, paused, then turned back. Amina was still sleeping. Zuri studied her mother's face, memorizing it, the lines of exhaustion, the softness that appeared only in rest. A wave of fear rose suddenly in her chest. She was young enough to know that leaving meant risk, that stepping into the world alone was not something children were meant to do. But she was also young enough not to be paralyzed by that fear. "I'll come back," Zuri whispered. "I promise." She opened the door quietly and stepped into the corridor. Outside, the hospital grounds buzzed with early morning movement. Vendors were setting up their stalls, spreading out fruits and newspapers. Taxis idled impatiently. Zuri walked toward the road, her small frame weaving carefully through grown-up legs that barely noticed her. She stopped at the edge of the street and took a deep breath. In her pocket was a folded piece of paper she had taken from the fridge days earlier. It was a flyer her mother had brought home, excited and nervous at the same time. Zuri unfolded it now, studying it the way she had before. A tall glass building was printed on the front. Beneath it, bold letters spelled the company's name. And just beside the image, circled carefully in red ink, was a bus number. Zuri didn't need to read the words. She knew what they meant. She waited. Cars rushed past, horns, blaring exhaust filling the air. The noise was loud, chaotic, overwhelming, but Zuri stood still, watching, patient. When the yellow bus finally appeared with the right number painted on its side, her heart leaped. The bus screeched to a stop, doors swinging open as passengers surged forward. Zuri hesitated only a second before stepping closer. A woman noticed her and reached out, instinctively guiding her up the steps. "Careful, little one," the woman said kindly. "Where are you going so early?" Zuri climbed into the seat. The woman pointed to her feet dangling above the floor. "To the big glass building," she replied simply. "My mama has an interview there." The woman studied her face for a moment, curiosity softening into something like respect. "Then sit near me," she said. "I'll tell you when it's time to get down." Zuri nodded, clutching the folder tightly. As the bus lurched forward, Lagos unfolded outside the windows in a blur of color and motion. Hawkers tapped on glass, music blared from open doors. Voices overlapped in constant rhythm. It was the world Zuri knew, but today it felt different. Today she wasn't just passing through it, she was moving with purpose. Was moving. The woman beside her asked no more questions. Perhaps she sensed something sacred in the child's quiet determination. Perhaps she understood in ways words couldn't explain that sometimes courage wears a very small face. Zuri sat still, her back straight, her eyes forward. In her mind there was no doubt, no second-guessing. Her mother needed help, and help Zuri believed meant showing up. When the bus finally slowed and the woman touched her arm, gently pointing toward a towering glass structure ahead, Zuri's breath caught. "That's it," the woman said. "Your stop." Zuri stepped down onto the pavement and looked up. The building rose higher than anything she had ever seen, its walls reflecting the morning sun. For a brief moment, the size of it threatened to overwhelm her. She tightened her grip on the folder, squared her shoulders the way she had seen adults do, and took a step forward. She was small. She was alone, but she was not turning back. Zuri stood at the edge of the pavement, her neck craned upward, eyes following the endless stretch of glass and steel that disappeared into the morning sky. The building seemed alive, reflecting sunlight, swallowing sound, daring anyone small to approach it. For a moment, the weight of where she was pressed down on her chest. She tightened her arms around the folder. Her mother had walked into rooms like this once, she remembered. Not this building, but places that smelled of books and ambition. Places where voices mattered. Zuri didn't know how those dreams slipped away, only that they had. and that somehow they had landed in her hands. She took a breath and walked toward the entrance. The revolving doors opened with a soft, mechanical sigh, and cool air rushed over her skin as she stepped inside. The noise of the street vanished instantly, replaced by polished silence. The lobby was vast, its marble floors gleaming, its walls rising like cliffs of glass. Every footstep echoed, every sound felt too loud. Zuri slowed instinctively, suddenly aware of her small size. Men and women moved past her in tailored clothes, eyes fixed on phones, briefcases swinging at their sides. None of them noticed her at first. She was just another detail in the background, easily missed. But Zuri didn't stop. She walked straight ahead, her sandals tapping lightly against the floor, her heart beating fast but steady. At the center of the lobby stood a long marble desk. Behind it sat a woman typing rapidly, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced speed. She wore her hair in neat braids pulled back from her face, gold earrings catching the light each time she moved. A name badge rested against her blouse. Zuri approached the desk slowly. The woman didn't look up at first. Zuri waited just as her teacher had taught her, quiet, patient, respectful. After a few seconds, the woman sensed movement and lifted her eyes. She blinked. Standing in front of her was a little girl in a bright Ankara dress holding a clear folder almost half her size. The woman leaned forward slightly, her professional expression softening into surprise. "Hello, sweetheart," she said gently. "Are you lost?" Zuri shook her head. "No," she replied, her voice calm. "I'm here for the interview." The woman froze for half a second, then smiled politely, assuming she had misunderstood. "An interview," she repeated. "For who?" "For my mama," Zuri said. She straightened her back just as she had seen adults do when they spoke about serious things. "She's very sick and couldn't come, so I came instead." The lobby seemed to exhale. A few people slowed their steps. A man near the elevator stopped pretending to scroll through his phone. Two security guards exchanged glances and began to move closer, their faces tightening with suspicion. The woman behind the desk raised a hand, subtly signaling the guards to pause. She crouched slightly so she was closer to Zuri's eye level. "What's your mother's name?" she asked carefully. "Amina Okafor," Zuri answered without hesitation. The woman turned back to her computer, typing quickly. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the screen. "Yes," she murmured. "She was scheduled for 9 o'clock today." Zuri nodded, relief flickering across her face. "Yes, ma'am. That's why I came early." The woman leaned back in her chair, inhaling slowly. She had worked at Mabaso Group Holdings for years and had seen desperation in many forms: pleading calls, fabricated excuses, emotional appeals. But this was different. This was a child standing in the middle of a corporate lobby, carrying her mother's hope in both hands. "What happened to your mama?" she asked softly. "She has a fever," Zuri said. "The doctor said she needs rest. But she really needs this job. She's been preparing for a long time." Her words were simple, but they landed heavily. The guards stopped advancing. One of them cleared his throat awkwardly and stepped back. Conversations around the lobby faded into murmurs. Something about the moment demanded attention. The receptionist straightened in her chair, then pressed a small button on her earpiece. "Please," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving Zuri. "Can you ask Mr. Edowale to come down to the lobby?" There was a pause. "Yes, right now." She released the button and turned back to Zuri, offering a warm, reassuring smile. "You're very brave," she said. "What's your name?" "Zuri," she replied. "Well, Zuri," the woman said, standing. "Why don't you sit with me for a moment?" She guided Zuri to a chair beside the desk. It was too tall for her, but Zuri climbed up with determination, settling in with her feet swinging just above the floor. She placed the folder on her lap, keeping one hand firmly on top, as if afraid it might disappear. Time moved strangely after that. Minutes stretched. People resumed walking, but slower now. Curious glances lingered longer than before. Whispers passed quietly between co-workers. Everyone sensed that something unusual was unfolding, even if they didn't yet understand what it was. On the top floor of the building, Adewale Mabaso stood by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city he controlled from spreadsheets and boardrooms. At 32, he was already known as one of the youngest and most uncompromising CEOs in the country. His suits were always immaculate, his expressions unreadable. He had built his reputation on precision and results, not sentiment. When his assistant entered with an unusual request, his annoyance was immediate. "I said no interruptions," Adewale replied curtly. "I know, sir," she said carefully. "But there's a child downstairs. She says she's here for an interview, for her mother." Adewale frowned. "Then security should handle it." "They wanted to," the assistant replied. "But the receptionist asked me to call you. She said you need to see this yourself." Adewale sighed, irritation tugging at his jaw. He straightened his jacket, already preparing to dismiss whatever delay awaited him. As the elevator descended, he expected chaos, or worse, manipulation. Another story designed to bypass process. The doors opened, and he stopped. In the center of the lobby sat a small girl in a colorful dress, her posture straight, her eyes focused. She rose when she saw him, instinctively sensing authority. The room seemed to quiet around them. She took one step forward and held out the folder with both hands. "Are you the boss?" she asked. "I am," Adewale replied slowly. "This is my mama," Zuri said. "She was supposed to come today, but she's very sick. So I came." Adewale looked down at her, then at the folder, then back at her face. There was no fear there, no attempt to impress, just honesty. "Why?" he asked, his voice lower than before. Zuri lifted her chin. "Because my mama deserves more than pain." The word struck him harder than he expected. Around them, the lobby held its breath. Adewale inhaled deeply, then turned slightly toward the receptionist. "Cancel my next meeting." "Sir," I said, "cancel it." He looked back at Zuri and gave a single nod. "Come with me." As they walked toward the conference room, Zuri's steps were small but steady. She didn't look back. Behind them, whispers erupted, but none of that mattered anymore. A door had opened, not because a rule was bent, but because something true had walked straight through it. The conference room was built for power, not for children. Its glass walls reflected light in sharp angles, and the long, polished table seemed to stretch endlessly, as though designed to intimidate anyone who sat at one end of it. High-backed leather chairs lined both sides, each one larger than Zuri herself. Adewale pulled out a chair and set it carefully in place. "Sit here," he said. Zuri hesitated for half a second, then climbed up with quiet determination. The chair swallowed her small frame, her feet swinging above the floor. But she sat upright, just as her mother had taught her, back straight, hands, steady eyes attentive. Adewale took the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He studied her openly now, no longer as an interruption but as a presence. Her dress was bright but clean. Her sandals were worn but intact. Her hair was neatly done, beads clicking softly when she moved her head. This was not a child who had wandered in by accident. This was a child who had arrived with intention. "So," Adewale said finally, his voice calmer than it had been downstairs, "tell me about your mother." Zuri placed both hands on the edge of the table and thought carefully before answering. "My mama works a lot," she began. "She cleans people's houses, she sells food. Sometimes she comes home very tired." Adewale nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue. "She wakes up before the sun," Zuri said, "and she comes back when it's dark. But she still helps me with my homework, even when her eyes are tired." There was no drama in her voice, no attempt to perform, just facts spoken plainly. "She doesn't buy things for herself," Zuri added after a moment. When her shoes break, she says they're still fine. Then she buys me new ones. Adewale's gaze dropped briefly to Zuri's sandals. Clean, carefully repaired. And school, he asked. Zuri's expression softened. Mama likes school. She told me she was very good at it. She said learning made her feel strong inside her head. Adewale leaned back slightly. She wanted to finish university, Zuri continued. But when she had me, she stopped. She said I was her blessing, not her mistake. Something tightened in Adewale's chest. He had conducted hundreds of interviews in his career. He had listened to rehearsed answers, polished achievements, confident exaggerations. None of them sounded like this. None of them carried this weight. Why does she want this job? He asked. Zuri didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then back up. She's tired of only surviving, she said softly. She wants to use her brain again. She wants to feel seen. The room went completely still. Adewale felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't sympathy, this wasn't pity, it was recognition. After a while, he closed the folder gently and stood. You've done very well, he said to Zuri. Someone will take you back to the front desk. Zuri nodded, sliding down from the chair carefully. She followed the receptionist out without protest, without looking back. When the door closed, Adewale remained standing. He opened the folder again, this time with full attention. Amina Okafor. The resume was neat, clear, and direct. No unnecessary language, no exaggeration. He scanned the education section first and paused. University of Ibadan, marketing, full scholarship, top percentile. His brows drew together. Leadership roles, Student Business Association president, peer mentor. Then the timeline broke. No graduation date, no internships, no corporate progression. Instead, a list that told a different story: cleaner, street vendor, waitress, night shift worker, janitor. Adewale traced the dates slowly with his finger. He didn't need an explanation. The story was written clearly enough. A capable woman had been pushed off course not by lack of talent but by circumstance, by responsibility, by a system that punished interruption and called it neutrality. He closed the folder and exhaled. That afternoon, a delivery bike pulled up outside the clinic. A nurse carried a small package into Amina's room and placed it gently on the bedside table. Amina stirred, her fever easing just enough for consciousness to return. Her eyes opened halfway. She saw flowers first. Wildflowers, simple, colorful, arranged carefully in a glass jar. Next to them sat a small box wrapped in clean cream paper. A note rested against it. Amina's heart began to race. Her hands trembled as she reached for the card. To the strongest woman I've met today, it read. Adewale Mabaso. Inside the box was a small carton of chocolate milk, Zuri's favorite. Amina sat upright too quickly, pain flaring through her body. Zuri, she whispered, panic surging. The chair beside her bed was empty. Her breath caught. Her mind raced through worst-case scenarios. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking as she searched for the number printed on the flyer she had memorized. When the call connected, she spoke before fear could stop her. Please, she said. My name is Amina Okafor. I think my daughter may have come to your office today. She's 5 years old. I'm so sorry. A warm chuckle interrupted her. Don't worry, Ms. Okafor, the voice said gently. Your daughter is safe. Amina's knees nearly gave way. In fact, the woman continued. She may have just earned you a second chance. The next morning, a formal message arrived at the clinic. Mabaso Group Holdings invited Amina Okafor for an in-person interview. This time the door had not closed, it had waited. The message arrived just after sunrise, when the clinic was still quiet, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and boiled tea. A nurse tapped lightly on the door before stepping in, holding a printed letter in her hand. Ms. Okafor, she said gently, this was delivered for you. Amina took the paper with careful fingers, afraid that if she moved too fast, the moment might vanish. Her eyes skimmed the first line, then the second. By the time she reached the signature at the bottom, her vision blurred. A formal interview. Mabaso Group Holdings. Confirmed. Her chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something dangerously close to hope. She looked down at Zuri, who sat on the edge of the bed swinging her legs, sipping the last of her chocolate milk as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Did you? Amina began, her voice catching. Did you really go there? Zuri nodded, calm and certain. Yes, Mama. Amina pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by a wave of emotions too large to name. Gratitude, fear, pride, a quiet awe at the child in front of her. I was scared, Zuri added honestly. But I knew you needed help. Amina pulled her daughter into her arms, careful of the IV line, holding her tightly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Some things didn't need words. The doctor discharged Amina later that afternoon with strict instructions to rest, but rest was a luxury she could no longer afford to ignore reality. The interview was scheduled for the following morning. That night, Amina barely slept. She washed her one good skirt by hand, scrubbing carefully until the water ran clear, then hung it near the window to dry. She ironed her blouse slowly, pressing out every crease as if smoothing away years of doubt. Her shoes were old, but she cleaned them until they shone softly under the light. Zuri watched quietly from the mattress. You'll do well, she said at last. Amina smiled. Because of you. The next morning they stood together outside the glass doors of Mabaso Group Holdings. The building no longer felt as intimidating as it had the day before, perhaps because this time Amina was walking in with her head high. The receptionist recognized them instantly. Welcome back, Ms. Okafor, she said warmly. Mr. Mabaso is expecting you. Amina followed her down the same hallway Zuri had walked the day before, her heart pounding with each step. The door to the executive office opened, and Adewale Mabaso stood waiting. He looked different in person, less distant, more grounded. He stepped forward and extended his hand. I'm glad you're feeling better, he said. Thank you, sir, Amina replied, shaking his hand firmly. And thank you for yesterday. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Your daughter gave the most honest interview I've heard in a long time. Today I'd like to hear from you. Amina sat. For the first time in years, she spoke not from desperation, but from truth. She talked about her education, her interrupted studies, the skills she had sharpened through survival. She didn't hide her gaps or apologize for them. She explained them. Adewale listened. When the interview ended, he nodded once. We'll be in touch. A week later, Amina Okafor walked back into the building not as a visitor but as an employee. The position was junior, the pay modest, but it was a beginning. Not everyone welcomed her. She heard the whispers in elevators, the half-smiles that didn't reach people's eyes. That's her, someone muttered once. The woman with the child. Amina didn't respond. She arrived early, stayed late, and worked with quiet precision. She asked questions when she didn't know something. She corrected her mistakes without excuses. Slowly, steadily, she earned space. Adewale did not hover. He watched. One evening, when Amina stayed late finishing a report, a sandwich appeared on her desk. No note, just care delivered without spectacle. Another day she called in late, voice strained. Zuri had a fever. The response came quickly, family first. Take your time. And in that space, free of judgment, free of pressure, Amina began to grow. Every Friday after school, Zuri came to the office. The guards greeted her by name. The receptionist kept her favorite juice cold. She had a small cushion in Adewale's office, a box of crayons, a stool just her size. She sat quietly while her mother worked, humming softly, coloring pictures of houses, stars, and people holding hands. Sometimes Adawale paused mid-call to glance over at her drawings. Once she drew a small crown on his head and labeled it King of Papers. He laughed a real laugh and didn't correct her. Over time, the office changed. People smiled more. Conversations softened. Zuri reminded adults to eat lunch, to rest their eyes, to be kind. Without realizing it, she brought life into a place that had long forgotten it. And to Adawale, she brought something else. Peace. Months passed. Amina's role expanded. Her voice grew confident. She became known for her clarity, her insight, her reliability. She was no longer the woman with the child. She was respected. One quiet Friday evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Amina and Adawale sat side by side reviewing a presentation. Zuri curled up nearby with a blanket and a juice box, half asleep. They worked in comfortable silence. Then Zuri stirred. "Mama," she asked softly. "Yes, my love." Zuri looked at Adawale, eyes serious. "Can I call Uncle Adawale Baba?" The room stilled. "He picks me up," Zuri continued. "He brings me ice cream. He makes you smile." Amina's breath caught. She turned, uncertain. Adawale knelt beside Zuri and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His voice was quiet, steady. "It would be my honor." Tears filled Amina's eyes, not from pain, but from release. For the first time in a long while, she felt chosen. At the end-of-year gala, Adawale raised a glass and told a story, not of profits or projections, but of a small girl who walked into a lobby carrying her mother's dream. He lifted his glass to Amina, to Zuri. "Family," he said, "is not always blood." Under the golden lights, they stood together, mother-child and the man who chose them both. And in a city of closed doors, one small girl proved that sometimes the bravest steps come from the smallest shoes. The weeks that followed the gala did not change everything overnight, but something subtle shifted within the walls of Mabaso Group Holdings. It was not written into policy or announced in meetings. It lived instead in the small, almost invisible ways people began to move differently around one another. Amina noticed it first in the mornings. She still arrived early, as she always had. But now she no longer felt like a guest borrowing space. The security guards greeted her with familiarity instead of formality. Colleagues nodded with genuine respect instead of curiosity. Her name appeared more often in email threads attached to ideas instead of explanations. Belonging, she was learning, did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived quietly, like breath returning after a long time underwater. Her workload increased, but so did her confidence. Adawale began inviting her into strategy discussions, not as an observer, but as a contributor. At first, Amina spoke carefully, measuring every word. Years of being ignored had taught her caution. But when her insights were met with thoughtful questions instead of dismissal, something inside her loosened. She began to speak more freely. Her background, once a liability, became a strength. She understood markets not just from reports, but from lived experience. She knew how people thought when money was tight, how trust was built slowly, how small changes created real impact. Adawale listened often, nodding in silence, sometimes pushing back, always engaging. Zuri remained a constant presence. Every Friday she arrived with her small backpack and bright smile, waving at everyone as if they were old friends. She learned names quickly. She remembered who liked tea without sugar and who forgot to eat lunch. She left drawings on desks, simple stick figures holding hands, buildings with smiling windows. No one asked her to stop. In fact, people began to look forward to her visits. Amina watched it all with a quiet sense of wonder. For so long she had believed that bringing her child into professional spaces was a weakness, something to hide or apologize for. But here Zuri was not a burden. She was a bridge. One afternoon, as Amina prepared to leave, she overheard two senior managers talking near the elevator. "The office feels different these days," one said. The other nodded. "It does. More human." Amina walked past them without comment, but her heart warmed. Still, not everything was easy. There were moments when old doubts crept back in, when deadlines piled up, when mistakes happened, when exhaustion returned. On those days, Amina questioned whether she truly belonged, or whether this was all temporary grace. It was during one of those moments that Adewale surprised her. She had stayed late alone in the office, reworking a proposal that hadn't landed the way she hoped. The city lights outside the window blurred as her eyes grew tired. She didn't hear the door open. "You're still here," Adewale said. Amina looked up, startled. "I just want to get this right." He walked over, glanced at the document, then leaned against the desk. "You already have," he said. "Perfection isn't the goal. Progress is." She studied his face, searching for judgment, but found none. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once and left her to finish in peace. That night, as Amina walked home with Zuri's small hand in hers, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: safety. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of support. At home, life remained modest. The apartment was small. Money was still managed carefully. But laughter returned more easily. Meals were no longer eaten in silence. Zuri talked endlessly about school, about her drawings, about Uncle Adewale and the stories he told. Amina listened, smiling, grateful. As months passed, the connection between Amina and Adewale deepened, though neither of them named it. It lived in shared glances during meetings, in comfortable silences, in the way they trusted each other's judgment without explanation. They spoke often but rarely about themselves. It was Zuri who noticed the change first. Children see patterns adults try to ignore. One evening, as they walked through the park near their home, Zuri skipped ahead, then turned suddenly. "Mama," she asked, "why do you smile more at work now?" Amina paused. "Do I?" Zuri nodded seriously. "Yes. You don't look tired in your eyes anymore." Amina swallowed, unsure how to answer. "Maybe," she said softly, "because I'm finally doing what I love." Zuri considered this, then smiled. "And because Uncle Adewale makes you feel safe." Amina laughed gently, brushing it off. "Go on, little one." But the words stayed with her. The turning point came quietly, without drama. One afternoon, a major client presentation ran long. Amina and Adewale worked side by side, adjusting slides, refining arguments. Zuri sat nearby, drawing as usual, her presence as natural as the chairs in the room. When the meeting ended successfully, relief washed over them both. "Well done," Adewale said. "You too," Amina replied. They exchanged a look, brief, loaded, unspoken. Zuri looked up from her drawing. "Mama," she said, "you look happy." Amina nodded. "I am." Zuri smiled. "Then that means everything is okay." Later that evening, as the office emptied and the city settled into twilight, Adewale lingered by the window, watching Amina gather her things. "You've changed this place," he said suddenly. Amina turned. "I don't think so." He shook his head. "You have, both of you." She didn't argue. Instead, she said the truth she had learned the hard way. Sometimes all people need is to be seen. He met her gaze. And sometimes, he replied, all systems need is to be challenged by truth. They stood there for a moment, the space between them filled with understanding rather than words. In the weeks that followed, Amina was promoted quietly, without ceremony. Her responsibilities grew. So did her influence. She mentored younger staff, especially women who reminded her of herself. She encouraged them to speak, to question, to trust their worth. Zuri continued to be the heartbeat of the office. On her birthday, the staff surprised her with a small cake and handmade cards. She beamed, cheeks flushed with joy. "This is my work family," she announced proudly. Amina watched, tears in her eyes. That night, as she tucked Zuri into bed, her daughter looked up at her with sleepy certainty. "You know," Zuri murmured, "sometimes when you help someone, you help yourself too." Amina kissed her forehead. Yes, my love, she whispered. Sometimes you do. Outside, the city moved on, busy, imperfect, relentless. But inside one small family and one changing company, something rare had taken root. Not just opportunity, belonging. Success, Amina learned, did not silence doubt, it invited it. As her role expanded within Mabaso Group Holdings, so did the attention. Her ideas were now part of major discussions. Her name appeared in reports circulated at higher levels. People began to reference her work, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with thinly veiled resentment. The whispers returned. They followed her through corridors and hovered just outside meeting rooms, quiet enough to deny, loud enough to feel. She's moving fast, you know why. If it weren't for the child. Amina heard them all. At first they stung more than she expected, not because she doubted her ability, but because she knew how easily narratives replaced truth. She had worked relentlessly to earn her place, late nights, early mornings, careful preparation. Yet for some, her story would always begin and end with pity. She did not confront anyone. She did not defend herself loudly. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant choosing where to spend your energy. Instead, she focused on excellence. She double-checked her work. She asked sharper questions. She backed every proposal with data, with insight, with clarity that left no room for dismissal. When challenges arose, she faced them head-on, never hiding behind excuses. Adewale noticed. He never addressed the whispers directly. He understood power well enough to know that words spoken from authority could quiet a room, but would not change hearts. What changed hearts was consistency, so he gave Amina space to lead. During one particularly tense project, a senior manager openly questioned her approach in a meeting. The room stiffened. Eyes shifted toward Adewale, waiting for intervention. Amina spoke first. She listened carefully, then responded calmly, walking the team through her reasoning step by step. She acknowledged valid concerns, adjusted where necessary, and stood firm where it mattered. When she finished, the room was silent. Adewale nodded once. "Proceed," he said. That was all. After the meeting, the same manager approached Amina privately. His tone was different, measured, respectful. "I didn't expect that," he admitted. Amina met his gaze. "Neither did I," she replied gently. "But here we are." Outside the office, life continued its slow transformation. Zuri had grown more comfortable in her new routines. School was going well. Her teachers spoke of her confidence, her kindness, her unusual sense of responsibility for someone so young. She still colored endlessly, but now her drawings included office scenes, people around tables, smiling faces, tall buildings with open doors. At home, Amina and Zuri settled into rhythms that felt almost foreign at first. Evenings were no longer rushed. There was time for homework without exhaustion, pressing in time for conversations that didn't revolve around worry. One night, as they shared a simple meal, Zuri looked up thoughtfully. "Mama," she asked, "do people always like it when someone changes?" Amina paused. "Not always," she said carefully. "Change can make people uncomfortable, even if it's good," Zuri pressed. "Yes," Amina replied softly. "Even then?" Zuri nodded, absorbing this. "Then I think you're very brave." Amina smiled, touched by the simplicity of her daughter's wisdom. At work, another test emerged. A new initiative was announced, one that would redefine how the company engaged with underserved markets. Adewale placed Amina at the center of it, naming her project lead. The decision was bold. So was the reaction. Some welcomed it, others questioned it openly. The responsibility was immense, the risk real. Amina felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders. Failure would not just reflect on her, it would confirm every doubt whispered behind closed doors. The night before the first major presentation, she sat alone in her apartment, notes spread across the table. Zuri slept nearby, curled around her favorite stuffed animal. Amina stared at the pages, her confidence wavering for the first time in months. What if they were right? What if she wasn't ready? Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Adawale. You don't have to prove anything, just tell the truth. She exhaled slowly. The next day, Amina stood before the board, her voice steady as she spoke about access, dignity, and opportunity. She didn't oversell. She didn't perform. She presented reality clearly, honestly, powerfully. When she finished, the room erupted in discussion, not dismissal, not doubt, but engagement. The project was approved. Afterward, as the team dispersed, Adawale lingered. You handled that well, he said. I was afraid, Amina admitted. He smiled faintly. Courage usually feels like that. The months that followed reshaped more than just Amina's career. Mabaso Group Holdings began to change from the inside. Policies evolved, conversations shifted. The presence of Zuri, still quietly coloring in corners, still reminding adults to rest, remained a gentle anchor. People stopped whispering when Amina passed. Some even sought her guidance. One afternoon, a young woman approached her hesitantly. I heard your story, she said. It gave me hope. Amina nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Then tell yours, she replied, it matters. As for Adawale, his transformation was quieter but no less profound. He found himself listening more, reacting less. The walls he had built around efficiency and control softened, making room for connection. He began to see leadership not as distance, but as presence. One evening, as he walked through the office after hours, he noticed a small drawing taped to his door. It showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a tall building. A crown hovered over one figure's head. Family Zuri had written carefully beneath it. He smiled. At the end of that quarter, Amina received recognition not from Adawale, but from her peers. They nominated her for an internal leadership award, citing her integrity, her insight, and her ability to bring people together. When her name was announced, she stood slowly, overwhelmed. This is unexpected, she said, voice trembling slightly. But I accept it, for every woman who was told her story disqualified her. The room erupted in applause. Later that night, as Amina tucked Zuri into bed, her daughter asked sleepily, Did you win, Mama? Amina kissed her forehead. Yes, she whispered. But not the way I thought I would. Outside, the city lights glowed as they always had, indifferent, relentless. But inside one home and one changing company, something powerful was unfolding. Not just success, but strength earned, doubts confronted, and a future no longer defined by whispers. Growth has a way of waking old ghosts. For Amina, it came in the form of an email forwarded late one evening, an inquiry from a partner organization reviewing her background as part of a routine audit. The message was polite, procedural, and unsettling in ways she couldn't immediately explain. It asked for clarification about her interrupted education, the missing graduation date, the years spent outside formal employment. She read it twice, then a third time. On paper, her story was clean. Honest, documented. But Amina knew how easily truth could be twisted when filtered through bias. She had seen it happen to others, women whose lives did not follow straight lines, whose resilience was misread as inconsistency. The next morning, she walked into the office with her shoulders squared, her mind already preparing responses. She would explain. She would provide records. She would not apologize. Still, the feeling lingered, like a hand reaching from the past, testing whether the door was truly closed. Adawale noticed the change immediately. You're quiet today, he said as they passed in the hallway. Just thinking, Amina replied. He didn't press. He had learned when to wait. The review meeting was scheduled for Friday. In the days leading up to it, the whispers returned, not louder but sharper. Someone mentioned risk. Another questioned optics. The language was careful, professional, and loaded. Amina refused to retreat. She prepared meticulously, gathering transcripts, letters, timelines. She rehearsed not just answers, but tone, calm, grounded, unflinching. The night before the meeting, she sat at the kitchen table long after Zuri had gone to sleep, organizing papers into neat stacks. Zuri woke briefly and padded into the room, rubbing her eyes. "Mama," she murmured, "are you worried?" Amina hesitated. "A little." Zuri climbed onto a chair beside her and rested her head on Amina's arm. "You always tell me the truth is strong." Amina smiled softly. "It is." "Then it will help you," Zuri said, already half asleep. The meeting room felt colder than usual on Friday morning. Representatives from the partner organization sat across the table, polite and distant. The questions began simply: education, experience, timeline. Amina answered clearly, steadily. When they reached the gap, the room tightened. "Can you explain the interruption in your studies?" one of them asked. "Yes," Amina replied. "I became a mother." There it was, plain, undeniable. She spoke about choices made under pressure, about survival, about skills learned outside classrooms. She spoke without shame, without defensiveness. When she finished, she waited. One of the representatives nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty," he said. The meeting ended without confrontation, without judgment. But Amina didn't relax until the door closed behind them. That afternoon, Adewale called her into his office. "They're satisfied," he said simply. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by something else: fatigue. The kind that comes from constantly having to prove what others are allowed to assume. Adewale watched her carefully. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. She met his gaze. "I know." It was the first time she truly believed it. Outside the office, Zuri's world continued to expand. She had been selected for a school program focused on leadership and community service, something her teacher said came naturally to her. At the first meeting, Zuri stood in front of her classmates and spoke about helping people when rules feel too heavy. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Amina listened from the back of the room, tears slipping down her cheeks. She recognized the courage. It was the same courage that had walked into a glass building months earlier with a folder too big for small hands. That weekend, Amina received a call she hadn't expected. It was from the university. They had reviewed her records as part of an alumni outreach initiative. Someone had flagged her file, noticed the unfinished degree, the scholarship, the abrupt exit. They were offering her a path back, flexible options tailored for working parents. Amina sat down, slowly stunned. After the call ended, she stared at the wall for a long time, letting the possibility settle. It felt unreal, like the past reaching forward not to haunt her but to offer repair. She shared the news with Adewale on Monday. "You should do it," he said without hesitation. "I'm not sure I can manage everything," Amina admitted. He smiled. "You already are." The months that followed were full and demanding. Amina worked by day, studied by night. Zuri sat beside her, coloring or practicing reading, the two of them sharing quiet determination. At work, Amina's influence deepened. She was no longer just executing ideas, she was shaping direction. Teams sought her input early. Decisions were made with her perspective in mind. One evening, as they reviewed a proposal together, Adewale paused. "You know," he said, "this company is different because of you." Amina shook her head. "It's different because people are willing to change." He considered this. Maybe. But someone had to show us how. The acknowledgement was gentle, but it mattered. As the year drew to a close, Mabaso Group Holdings prepared for a major public announcement, an initiative centered on inclusive hiring and flexible work structures. Amina had helped design it from the ground up. At the launch event, she stood beside Adewale as he addressed the room. "This isn't charity," he said. "It's recognition. Talent doesn't disappear because life happens." The applause was long and sincere. Later that night, as Amina and Zuri walked home beneath the city lights, Zuri looked up. Mama, she asked, did the past come back? Amina smiled. Yes. Was it scary? Sometimes. Zuri nodded thoughtfully. But you didn't run. No, Amina said. I stood. Zuri grinned. That's what heroes do. Amina laughed, pulling her daughter close. The past had knocked. The present had answered. And the future, once fragile and uncertain, now stood firmly in their grasp. There was no single moment when Amina realized she was no longer afraid of losing everything again. The fear didn't disappear all at once. It softened gradually like a knot loosening thread by thread until one day she noticed she was breathing freely in places where her chest used to tighten. It showed up in small decisions. She stopped checking her email late at night, convinced that bad news would undo her progress. She began sleeping through the early hours without jolting awake in panic. She allowed herself to imagine plans that stretched beyond the next month. And Adewale noticed the difference. During meetings, Amina's voice carried a steadiness that didn't waver when challenged. She no longer second-guessed her instincts. When she disagreed, she did so respectfully but firmly grounded in knowledge and lived experience. One afternoon, after a particularly intense strategy session, Adewale closed his notebook and looked around the table. I think we're done here, he said. As the others filed out, he remained seated. You handled that well, he said, not as praise, but as acknowledgement. Amina smiled faintly. It helps when I know I'm not standing alone. He nodded. You aren't. The words were simple, but they landed deeply. Outside the office, life continued to reshape itself in quiet, meaningful ways. Amina had begun attending evening classes again, balancing lectures with work and motherhood. The rhythm was demanding, but it felt purposeful. Zuri often sat beside her at the kitchen table, both of them focused on their tasks, one studying marketing theory, the other practicing spelling. They had become a team. One night, Zuri looked up from her book and asked, Mama, do grown-ups ever get tired of trying? Amina paused, then answered honestly, yes, but we keep going anyway. Zuri nodded solemnly. Because someone is watching. Amina's heart tightened. At Mabaso Group Holdings, the inclusive hiring initiative Amina had helped build began to show results. New faces appeared in the office, women returning to work after long absences, young men from overlooked communities, professionals whose paths had been interrupted by circumstance. Amina made time for them. She listened to their stories without judgment, offered guidance without condescension. She did not promise ease. She promised honesty. Word spread quickly. She understands, people said. What they meant was simple. She had been there. Adewale observed these interactions from a distance. Leadership, he realized, was not about control or perfection. It was about trust earned, extended, returned. One evening, long after the office had emptied, he found Amina in a conference room reviewing notes. You're still here, he said. So are you, she replied, smiling. They shared a quiet laugh. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city lights flickered outside, casting reflections across the glass walls. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. I never planned for this, Adewale said suddenly. For what? Amina asked. For any of this, he said. The company, the responsibility, you. She met his gaze, surprised by the honesty. Neither did I. They stood there, not crossing a line, not naming what had grown between them. Some things didn't need definition yet. They needed space. Zuri provided that space in her own way. She continued to visit the office on Fridays, but now she also spent time with other children whose parents worked late. She organized small drawing sessions, shared snacks, created little pockets of joy where stress had once lived. One afternoon, she approached Adewale with a serious expression. Uncle Adewale, she said, Mama works very hard. Yes, he replied, she does. And you work very hard too, Zuri continued. But sometimes hard workers forget to rest. He smiled. Is that so? Zuri nodded firmly. Mama says rest helps people stay kind. Adewale laughed softly. Your mama is wise. I know, Zuri said, beaming. That evening, Adewale left the office earlier than usual. The following weeks brought challenges, as they always did. Not every initiative succeeded. Not every decision was met with applause. There were difficult conversations, setbacks, revisions. But Amina no longer faced them with fear. One particularly challenging situation involved a long-standing client resistant to the company's new inclusive policies. The pushback was intense, the stakes high. During the negotiation, Amina spoke with clarity and compassion, reframing the conversation around long-term value and shared responsibility. When the meeting ended, the client agreed to move forward. Later, Adewale turned to her. You didn't just win them over, he said. You changed how they think. Amina shrugged lightly. People listen when they feel respected. That night, as she walked home with Zuri, Amina reflected on how far they had come. The city felt different now, not less chaotic, not less demanding, but more navigable. She knew where she stood. At home, after Zuri fell asleep, Amina sat quietly reviewing notes for class. Her phone buzzed. A message from Adewale. Thank you for today. She typed back simply. Anytime. The exchange was brief, unremarkable on the surface, but beneath it lived a mutual understanding that neither of them was alone anymore. Weeks later, during a company retreat, Adewale addressed the leadership team. We've spent years measuring success by numbers alone, he said. But people are not metrics. Stories matter. He paused, then added, and sometimes the most powerful changes begin with listening. Amina felt eyes turn toward her, not with suspicion but with respect. After the session, a colleague approached her. You've changed how I see leadership, he said. Amina smiled. I'm still learning. Adewale overheard the exchange and nodded quietly. That evening, as the retreat wound down, Amina and Adewale found themselves walking along the edge of the property, away from the noise. I used to think vulnerability was weakness, Adewale admitted. And now Amina asked. Now I think it's courage, he said. She met his gaze. It is. They walked on side by side, the distance between them defined not by uncertainty but by choice. Back home, Zuri slept peacefully, unaware of how deeply her presence had reshaped two lives. She had never set out to change systems or redefine leadership. She had simply shown up when it mattered, and in doing so, she had taught two adults something essential. That strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it chooses quietly. The closer Amina came to completing her degree, the more clearly she saw how much her life had changed. Not just in circumstance, but in meaning. The fear that once shaped every decision no longer ruled her, but it had not vanished entirely. Instead, it had transformed into something steadier: responsibility. Responsibility to herself, responsibility to her daughter, responsibility to the people who now looked to her as proof that detours did not erase worth. Her final semester was demanding. Coursework intensified, deadlines overlapped, and exhaustion returned in quiet waves. But this time she was not alone. She studied on lunch breaks. She reviewed notes on the bus ride home. She wrote papers late into the night while Zuri slept beside her, the soft rhythm of her breathing grounding Amina when her thoughts threatened to race. At work, expectations remained high. The inclusive hiring initiative had gained public attention. Media inquiries increased. Industry leaders reached out, curious about the company's sudden shift in tone and structure. Praise arrived, but so did scrutiny. One morning, an internal memo circulated announcing a comprehensive review of leadership structures and policy accountability. It was framed as progress, as transparency. But Amina understood what it meant. Visibility invites examination. She welcomed it. When asked to present the rationale behind the changes, Amina didn't rely on emotional appeals. She relied on truth data paired with lived experience. She spoke of productivity, retention, loyalty. She spoke of dignity. This isn't about lowering standards, she said during one session. It's about recognizing excellence where we've refused to look before. Some nodded. Others listened carefully, still weighing. After the meeting, a senior executive approached her. "You speak like someone who's lived this," he said. "I have," Amina replied. He nodded thoughtfully. "It shows." Adewale remained a steady presence through it all. He did not shield Amina from pressure, nor did he place her above accountability. Instead, he stood beside her, asking questions, offering perspective, trusting her judgment. One evening, as they reviewed a report together, he paused. "You know," he said, "you don't flinch anymore." Amina looked up. "At what?" "At being seen," he replied. She considered this, then smiled. "I spent too long trying to disappear." That same week, Zuri brought home a school assignment, a short essay titled, "Who Inspires Me?" She handed it to Amina shyly. Amina read it slowly, her chest tightening with each line. "My mama inspires me because she keeps going even when things are hard. She helps people and she listens. She didn't give up on her dreams. And she helps other people remember theirs." Amina hugged her daughter tightly, tears spilling freely. "You inspire me too," she whispered. Zuri smiled. "I learned from you." As the semester neared its end, the university invited Amina to speak at a small panel for returning students. She hesitated at first. Public speaking still stirred old insecurities, but agreed. Standing at the podium, she looked out at the faces before her. Some were young, others older. Many carried the same uncertainty she once had. "I didn't take the straight path," she began. "I didn't finish when I planned to. I left, I came back, and I almost didn't come back at all." The room was silent, but the detour taught me things the straight path never could. Resilience, perspective, compassion. When she finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Afterward, a woman approached her with tears in her eyes. "I thought it was too late for me," she said. Amina shook her head gently. "It isn't." Back at Mabaso Group Holdings, the impact of Amina's leadership was becoming undeniable. Teams under her guidance showed higher engagement, stronger collaboration, and lower turnover. The data spoke clearly. Still, one final challenge emerged. A long-standing investor raised concerns about the company's direction, questioning whether its new priorities aligned with profitability. The issue escalated quickly, drawing attention from the board. Amina was asked to present her case. The room was formal, tense. The stakes were high. She spoke calmly, outlining results, projections, and long-term value. But she also spoke of something less tangible: trust. "You can't quantify belonging easily," she said, "but you can see its effects. People who feel valued don't just stay, they build." When she finished, silence followed. Then one board member spoke. "This is the most compelling case we've heard." The investor withdrew the objection. After the meeting, Adewale exhaled deeply. "That could have gone very differently," he said. "But it didn't," Amina replied, "because the truth held." That night, as Amina and Zuri walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, Zuri skipped ahead, then turned suddenly. "Mama," she asked, "are you happy?" Amina didn't answer right away. She thought of the hospital bed, the closed door, the long nights of doubt. She thought of the office, the classroom, the quiet moments of choice. "Yes," she said finally. "I am." Zuri grinned. "Me too." The day Amina completed her final exam, she didn't celebrate loudly. She sat quietly at the kitchen table, letting the weight of the moment settle. When the results came weeks later, passed with distinction, she closed her eyes and breathed. The journey she had paused so long ago was complete. At work, the announcement was made quietly. No spotlight, no grand speech. But her colleagues congratulated her with genuine respect. Adewale stopped by her desk later that day. "You did it," he said simply. "We did," Amina replied. He smiled. That evening, as they prepared to leave, Zuri tugged at Amina's hand. "Mama," she said, "can we get ice cream?" Amina laughed. "Yes, we can." They walked out together, mother-daughter, and the man who had chosen to listen when it mattered. The truth that had once felt like a burden had become their foundation, and on it they were building something that would last. The morning Amina received the official confirmation of her degree, the city felt strangely still. Traffic still roared outside her window, vendors still called out prices, and the sun rose with the same certainty it always had. But inside her, something had settled. Closure. Not the loud, triumphant kind, the quiet kind that arrives when a long-held breath is finally released. She folded the printed confirmation carefully and slipped it into the same clear folder Zuri had once carried into the glass building. The folder had changed over time, edges softened, pages added, but it still held meaning. It was proof not only of achievement, but of endurance. At Mabasso Group Holdings, the season was shifting. The company's new direction had begun to attract attention far beyond the city. Industry publications requested interviews. Invitations to panels and forums arrived weekly. Adewale delegated many of them, but some conversations required Amina's presence. She did not seek the spotlight, but she did not hide from it either. At one regional conference, she stood before an audience of professionals who looked at her with interest rather than doubt. When she spoke, she didn't tell a dramatic story. She told a clear one about systems that overlook, about talent that waits quietly, about what happens when opportunity meets readiness. Afterward, people approached her not with pity but with respect. "I didn't know it could be done this way," one executive admitted. "It always could," Amina replied gently. "We just didn't try." Back at home, Zuri listened eagerly as her mother recounted the day. "Did they clap?" she asked. "They did." Amina smiled. Zuri beamed. "That means they understood." Amina nodded. "Yes, I think they did." As recognition grew, so did responsibility. Amina was offered a senior leadership role, one that came with influence, visibility, and expectations that reached far beyond her own team. The decision was not easy. Accepting meant longer hours, more scrutiny, and less certainty. Declining meant staying comfortable, safe. She took the offer letter home and set it on the table. Zuri studied it carefully. "Is it a good thing?" "It could be," Amina said honestly. "Then why do you look worried?" Amina smiled softly. "Because good things still ask something from us." Zuri nodded, considering this. "Mama," she said, "you always say fear means something matters." Amina laughed quietly. "You've been listening too closely." That night, after Zuri fell asleep, Amina sat alone weighing the decision. Her phone buzzed, a message from Adewale. "Whatever you choose, you won't be alone." She read it twice, then placed the phone face down. The next morning, she accepted. The announcement was made internally first. Reactions varied: surprise, admiration, quiet recalibration. But no one questioned her qualifications. That chapter had closed. In her new role, Amina moved with intention. She didn't rush to change everything. She listened, observed, learned. When she spoke, people paid attention, not because of her title, but because her words carried weight. Zuri's presence remained unchanged. She still arrived on Fridays, still colored quietly, still reminded adults to eat lunch and rest their eyes. But now people greeted her not just as a charming child, but as part of the company's story. One afternoon, a journalist visiting the office noticed her. "Is she yours?" he asked Amina. "Yes," Amina replied. "She seems very at home here." Amina smiled. "She helped build this place more than anyone knows." The journalist raised an eyebrow, intrigued. During the interview that followed, Amina was asked about leadership, resilience, and innovation. Near the end, the journalist paused. "There's a story circulating," he said. about a child who came to an interview on her mother's behalf. Amina met his gaze calmly. "It's true, would you like to share it?" Amina hesitated just briefly, then nodded. She told the story simply. No embellishment, no drama, just truth. When the article was published, it spread quickly. People shared it not because it was sensational, but because it was human. Messages poured in from strangers, parents, workers, women who had paused their dreams and wondered if they could ever return. Zuri read the article with careful concentration. "That's me," she said, pointing to the part about the child. "Yes," Amina laughed. "It is." Zuri considered this. "I didn't know I was doing something important." Amina knelt beside her. Most important things feel like that at first. As the year drew to a close, Mabaso Group Holdings prepared for its largest annual gathering yet. Leaders from across the region attended. The atmosphere was celebratory, but reflective of recognition that the company had changed in ways that numbers alone could not capture. Adewale stood at the podium scanning the room. This year he began. "We learned that growth isn't just about expansion. It's about alignment between who we say we are and how we act." He spoke of progress, of challenges, of learning. Then he gestured toward Amina. "There are moments that redefine an organization," he said. "Sometimes they arrive in unexpected forms." The room quieted. "A little girl once walked into our lobby holding her mother's dream." He continued. "She didn't knock. She didn't ask permission. She simply showed up with truth." Eyes turned toward Zuri, sitting beside Amina in a simple dress, her feet swinging. "That moment reminded us what leadership really looks like," Adewale said. "It looks like courage, it looks like love, and it looks like choosing to see people fully." The applause was long and sincere. Amina felt emotion rise, but she held it steady. This was not just recognition, it was acknowledgement. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Amina, Adewale, and Zuri stood together near the edge of the room. "You did well," Adewale said to Zuri. She smiled. "Mama did." He nodded. "Yes, she did." As they left the building together, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls, Amina looked up at the structure that had once intimidated her beyond words. It no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a beginning. The world had finally seen her not as a story of hardship, but as a leader shaped by truth. And this time, she was ready to be seen. Just when life begins to feel steady, it has a way of asking one final question. For Amina, that question arrived disguised as opportunity. An international partnership proposal landed on her desk early one Monday morning. It was ambitious, expanding Mabaso Group Holdings' inclusive hiring model across borders. The potential impact was enormous. So were the risks. The partners were powerful, influential, and known for their rigid corporate culture. They admired Mabaso's recent growth, but were skeptical of its soft values. Amina read the proposal carefully, her expression unreadable. This wasn't just about business. It was about whether the progress they had built could survive outside the walls that had protected it. The first meeting took place over video conference. Executives filled the screen, polished and composed. Their questions were sharp, their tone measured. "We respect your company's recent performance," one of them said, "but we are concerned about scalability. Policies rooted in personal stories can become liabilities." Amina didn't react immediately. She listened. Another executive leaned forward. "What happens when sentiment interferes with profit?" The old version of Amina, the one who feared being seen as emotional or unprofessional, might have retreated. She might have softened her words or redirected the conversation. She did neither. "Sentiment doesn't interfere with profit," she said calmly. "Disconnection does." The screen fell quiet. She continued outlining metrics, retention rates, productivity gains, and long-term stability. She spoke not from defensiveness but from conviction. This wasn't theory, it was evidence. Still, the resistance was clear. After the call ended, the room felt heavy. "That was intense," one team member muttered. Adewale turned to Amina. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Yes, but this won't be easy." Over the next few weeks, negotiations intensified. Documents went back and forth. Conditions were proposed, revised, and challenged. The partners pushed for compromises that would dilute the very principles Mabaso Group had worked to protect. Late one evening, Amina sat alone in her office, the city glowing beyond the glass. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. If she pushed too hard, the deal could collapse. If she gave in, everything they had built could unravel. Her phone buzzed. A message from Zuri's teacher. Zuri had been selected to speak at the school's community assembly. Amina smiled faintly. Life, it seemed, always knew when to remind her why choices mattered. The day of the assembly, Amina arrived early, slipping into a seat near the back. Zuri stepped onto the small stage, her feet barely reaching the floor. She took a breath. "My name is Zuri," she began. "I want to talk about helping people when they feel small." The room quieted. She spoke about kindness, about listening, about showing up even when you're scared. She didn't mention offices or interviews. She didn't need to. Amina felt tears gather as she listened. This was the standard. This was what truth looked like before it learned to hide. That evening, Amina made her decision. At the next negotiation meeting, she was clear. "These principles are not optional," she said. "They are the foundation. If that doesn't align with your vision, then this partnership isn't right for us." Silence followed. One executive exchanged glances with another. A long pause stretched. Then someone spoke. Perhaps he said slowly, "We've underestimated the strength of your position." The tone shifted. Negotiations resumed, this time with respect. Weeks later, the partnership was finalized, not on compromised terms, but on shared ones. Mabaso Group Holdings would expand, but not at the cost of its identity. The announcement was made quietly. No grand celebration, just acknowledgement. Adewale found Amina later that day. "You held the line," he said. She smiled. "So did you." That night, as they walked out together, Zuri skipping between them, Amina felt a familiar sensation, gratitude layered with relief. The test had come, and they had passed it not by bending, but by standing firm. Some victories announced themselves loudly with headlines, applause, and grand speeches. Others arrived quietly, settling into daily life so gently that only those who lived through the struggle truly understand their weight. For Amina, the true victory came not with the signed international partnership, nor with her title, nor with public recognition. It came on an ordinary morning as she stood in her kitchen watching Zuri tie her school shoes. Mama Zuri said, concentrating hard, "When I grow up, I want to help people feel brave." Amina smiled. "You already do." That was when she realized something fundamental had changed, not just in her life, but in her understanding of success. She was no longer running toward safety. She was standing firmly inside it. At Mabaso Group Holdings, the effects of the partnership began to unfold. New offices opened, new teams formed, and with them came new stories, people whose lives had been paused, redirected, or nearly erased by circumstance now finding room again. Amina made it a point to meet many of them personally. She listened more than she spoke. She remembered what it felt like to walk into a space already convinced you didn't belong. She greeted them not as a leader above them, but as someone who understood the weight they carried. "You're not behind," she told one woman who had returned to work after a decade. "You're not broken," she told a young man who had dropped out of school to care for siblings. "You're not invisible here," she told all of them. Those words mattered. Adewale watched the transformation with quiet pride. The company was performing well, better than many critics had predicted. But beyond the numbers, something else was happening. People stayed, People cared. People built. One evening, as they reviewed quarterly results, Adewale leaned back in his chair. "You know," he said, "this started with a closed door." Amina nodded. "And a child who didn't accept it." They shared a smile. Their relationship had evolved naturally without declarations or pressure. It was built in shared values and mutual respect in countless moments of choosing each other's presence. Zuri noticed it long before either of them named it. One Friday evening, as they prepared to leave the office together, Zuri tugged on Adewale's sleeve. "Uncle Adewale," she said seriously, "your family now." Adewale froze for a brief moment, then knelt to her level. "Is that so?" he asked gently. Zuri nodded. "Family is people who stay." Amina felt her breath catch. Adewale looked up at her, emotion clear in his eyes. "If you'll have me," he said quietly. Amina didn't answer with words. She reached for his hand. That was enough. Months later, the company hosted a small community event, nothing formal, just families, children, music, and food. Zuri ran freely among laughing adults who once measured life only in deadlines and profit margins. Amina watched her daughter from a distance, her heart full. She thought back to the clinic, the cracked ceiling, the cold voice on the phone, the feeling of being erased by a system that never bothered to know her name. If she could speak to that version of herself now, she would tell her this: hold on. Someone is watching, and love sometimes arrives in the smallest form. As the sun dipped low and music filled the air, Adewale stepped beside her. "You've changed more than this company," he said. "You've changed me." Amina smiled softly. "You listened. That's where change begins." He nodded, and Zuri Amina laughed quietly. "She reminded us who we are." Later that evening, as families began to leave, Adewale took the microphone, not as a CEO, but as a man reflecting on a journey. "We spend so much time talking about vision," he said. "But sometimes vision walks into your life without warning, small, fearless, and carrying someone else's dream." The crowd grew quiet. This company exists because people believe in possibility. But today, I want us to remember something else. Opportunity doesn't always knock. Sometimes it shows up anyway. He gestured toward Amina and Zuri. Because of one little girl, a mother was seen. Because of that mother, many others now are. The applause that followed was not loud, but it was deep. As night settled and the city lights flickered on, Amina, Zuri, and Adewale stood together, watching the space they had helped create, one built not on perfection but on truth. On the walk home, Zuri skipped ahead, then turned back suddenly. "Mama," she asked, "do you think the door will ever close again?" Amina considered the question carefully. "Some doors will," she said, "but now we know something important." "What?" "We know how to open new ones." Zuri smiled, satisfied. In a city full of noise and rules, one child had walked forward with nothing but love and courage. She didn't just carry a folder, she carried a truth the world needed to hear. And because someone finally listened, a future was rewritten, not only for one family but for everyone who believed that kindness still has power. If this story reached you, remember this. The smallest voices often carry the strongest truths. The bravest steps don't always come from grown feet. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up for someone else's dream. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe stories like this still matter, like, share, and subscribe. Because somewhere right now, another small voice is preparing to be heard. Sometimes life doesn't change because the system becomes kinder. It changes because someone refuses to accept silence as an answer. This story reminds us that strength is not always loud, educated, or powerful in the way the world defines power. Sometimes strength is a tired mother who keeps going even when the door closes. Sometimes it is a child who believes love is reason enough to try. Amina's journey teaches us that our past does not cancel our future. Pauses, detours, and sacrifices do not erase worth. They shape it. Zuri's courage shows us that kindness is not weakness and that showing up for someone else can quietly rewrite destiny. And Adewale's transformation reminds us that true leadership begins when we choose to see people not just positions or profits. This story is not only about success, it is about dignity. It is about the power of being seen after years of being overlooked. It is about how one small act of love can open doors that rules and qualifications never could. Most importantly, it asks us a simple question when someone stands before us carrying their truth. Will we turn them away or will we listen? If this story moved, you take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Who did it remind you of? What part touched your heart the most? And if you believe stories like this still matter, stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our humanity, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and one of them might be exactly what someone needs to hear today.